getting confused for, just being a liar and a fake is Jay Monahan. I don't think there's any confusion today. Based on reports, it was 90-10, 90% hatred for Monahan in this meeting with the PGA Tour players yesterday, 10% trying to back him. Chad, as they look back on this merger 10 years from now, how do you think it's received a decade from where we sit today?
And there's one thing that Jay Monahan has been correct about throughout this with his statements yesterday when he said we're going to look back 10 years from now and be able to judge the business side of this and what needed to be done. I think he's spot on with that. And I think he made the right business move for the PGA. I think he feared the antitrust lawsuit was not going his way. He knew that they were never going to be able to outbid the Saudi oil money that was pouring into the sport. So he made the practical business decision to merge with LIV, give them a seat at the table. And Jay Monahan's right. 10 years from now, we're going to look back at that and say that was the right business move for the survival, and not just survival, but for the PGA Tour to completely thrive the way they want to thrive with the best players in the world. Great job, Jay Monahan, on the business side of it. Here's the problem, though. Your legacy will always be tarnished because of the receipts kept by everyone. If you just would have kept your mouth shut the entire time and not gone on a PR tour to say everything you possibly could bad about Saudi Arabia, about the blood money pouring into LIV Tour, about how you were going to have the moral high ground for the rest of your life if you stick with the PGA Tour and don't leave for this renegade bunch of LIV guys who are just taking the money and running and spreading bad news about Phil Mickelson and doing everything else you did. If you would have taken the business approach, which you did 1 year later the entire time, and been a little bit more quiet about it and let things fall where they may, your legacy, now you would have been questioned today, no doubt. All the same headlines when those guys were leaving for LIV would have been the same columns written about it, same questions by CNN asked of you if you did this today, but you wouldn't look like an utter hypocrite the way you do right now because you ran your mouth a lot, and then in the end, you made the business decision. You made the business decision that Bryson DeChambeau made, that Dustin Johnson made, that Brooks Koepka made, that Phil Mickelson made, that others on tour made. You're no different. Well, you are different. You're a hypocrite because you ran your mouth way too much in the beginning. In the end, the right business move was made, but in the beginning, you spoke too much. And because of that, your legacy will be that of a hypocrite and nothing else.
And
now, the business part of this, Hutton, the consolidation of all of it, the power that they now have with both sides and everyone, and the revenue they're going to be getting from that sovereign wealth fund and advertising dollars, it's a business boom for the PGA Tour.
And that's exactly why Mickelson, Koepka, and others took the bag.
Absolutely.
And Monahan is a worse version of Mickelson today than we were in how we viewed Phil Mickelson a year ago. And it's based not just a hypocrite. You talk business moves. Jay Monahan was combating the business move of individual players on tour going to LIV with the patriotism card. You would think he was writing a new song for Toby Keith or Alan Jackson based on what he told Jim Nantz last year.
I want to ask about this. There was a story that was first reported in the New York Post yesterday by Brian Wacker about a 9/11 coalition of families and survivors of the 2001 terrorist attacks. 9/11 Families United sent a letter to the representatives of Phil, Dustin, Bryson, Reed, and others, quote, expressing their outrage towards the golfers for participating in the new league and accusing them of sports washing and betraying the United States. End quote. That's gotten a lot of steam over the last 24 hours. That story first reported again in the New York Post. How much did you talk to your players about the possible ramifications if they sign on with the new league?
Well, I talked to players. I've talked at a player meeting, and I've talked to a number of players individually for a long period of time. I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not know that there are significant implications. As it relates to the families of 9/11, I have two families that are close to me that lost loved ones. And so my heart goes out to them. And I would ask, any player that has left or any player that would ever consider leaving, have you ever had to apologize for being a member of the PGA Tour?
That was Jay Monahan last year. And now, yesterday, the merger happens for the survival of the PGA Tour, which we'll dive into later. Chad, this Saudi shill is what he's being called. I mean, it's the same thing that we heard last year with the individual players. Just keep in mind here, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, state-owned investment fund, they're shareholders, and they have bought a considerable percentage of these companies: Amazon, Google, Visa, Microsoft, Disney, Nintendo, Uber, PayPal, Zoom. So while you've got the PGA Tour on the front headline, they're the target, just like individuals were last year, from the golfing world. They own soccer, practically. They own FIFA. They own Formula One. They own a majority stake in practically anything involving esports. They have the financial backing to take over certain percentages of practically anything we're using. It's either them or China. And I view this as the same way you do, Chad, a business decision where they're taking shrapnel. And if it's truly a business decision, they would have known this a year ago, that this could happen. And the way they went on the attack, throwing out the patriotism angle of it and loyalty angle, it's way worse than anything involving shareholders from separate countries that are buying into American countries and American businesses and how we go about our daily lives using certain products. This is just a straight-up, bold-faced lie to the members of the PGA Tour from the guy running it. And by all accounts, less than, 5 people knew about it for 7 weeks, which is remarkable in and of itself. But I think he also knows, business decision-wise, they had to keep it quiet. It had to be, in the dark of night that they came in and took over.
Made the announcement that shocked the entire sports world.
That's right. And handed it off to CNBC.
Allie in the YouTube chat brings up an interesting point I did not consider. She says, if I'm Jay Monahan, I tell the golfers in a meeting that I actually did them a favor by falling on the sword without asking their opinion, thereby shielding them from the public scrutiny coming with this inevitable merger. The players wouldn't have bought that because they'd still want to say, they'd still want to, if they disagreed, they'd want to voice their disagreement before the deal went through.
They've been saying the same things,
That's an interesting point to make, that he could come out and say, hey, I knew this was going to be unpopular, and I wanted to make sure I was the only one blamed for it because I was the only one doing the negotiating.
Yeah, but everyone looks like a hypocrite now because they've been, repeating and parroting whatever Monahan was saying last year, including some of the networks that refused to carry the LIV Tour.
Jim Nantz.
Sure.
I mean, I love Jim Nantz, but Jim Nantz looks like Brandel Chamblee in a lot of ways. He wanted to take pot shots in every broadcast about the LIV Tour, and we heard him there asking that question to Jay Monahan. I mean, there's a lot of people that, and I'm not blaming them. I'm not on them for this, but there were a lot of people that got swept up in it that just took the PGA's position, and the problem with that was conflating the PGA with moral uprightness and thinking that, well, the PGA is the morally right grounds to stand on. And it's almost like they've replaced the PGA with some sort of religious figure in all of this, and good versus evil, and not just saying, I don't want to take that money because I'm uncomfortable with where that money comes from, or I'm uncomfortable with human rights records and all of that. That's an okay stance to take if that's why you didn't do it. The problem was they then took that and made it, the PGA is good, everyone with the LIV Tour is evil, instead of just saying, I personally don't want to do it. I'm more comfortable on the PGA Tour. And when that started to happen, it started with Jay Monahan. It went down to Rory McIlroy and a lot of players on tour. And now they all look foolish because their boss with the PGA Tour, in the end, is exactly about what everyone else was about in this story. Money. He took money. He took the business way out of it. He took the way of the path of least resistance in a lawsuit.
Yep.
Is what he did in the end. And now everybody looks foolish and looks like hypocrites.
Well, it wasn't the PGA, I think, that was Christ-like in this. It was individuals, right? Because in the PGA Tour, the brands are individual names, right? And the biggest one that was the spokesman for this and for what the PGA was standing for was Rory McIlroy. And yesterday in the players' meeting with Jay Monahan, as Monahan is trying to and attempting to justify the merger with LIV Golf, McIlroy kept quiet until a player ranked 227th in the world shouted at Monahan in this meeting and said and asked him to resign, saying, "We don't trust you, Jay. You lied to our face." That player was Grayson Murray. And McIlroy, instead of backing the players that have backed the PGA Tour, chose for whatever reason to somehow back Jay Monahan by saying, "Just play better, Grayson." And in that atmosphere, Grayson shouts back, "F you, Rory. F off." McIlroy's in an impossible spot right here.
It's a fair comeback, actually.
I don't know how he approaches this moving forward. The one thing he can't do is side with Jay Monahan, who is not just lying to players like Grayson Murray, lied to players like Rory McIlroy, who was asked about this literally at every event that he would attend and play in. He had no problem being the spokesman for the PGA Tour on all things integrity, loyalty, and patriotism, because that was the card they played, and not taking blood money. And he has no choice now, based on what Jay Monahan did, despite what McIlroy has, what he stood for over the last 12 months. He's like a lot of players. But I think it starts with him on being vocal about this entire issue. Scott Stallings is going to join us in a couple of hours, and he will be vocal about it. It's time for McIlroy to do that, because he was very vocal about it a year ago. And the crap that Monahan is spinning here, which, by the way, you're going to start to hear from the networks, who are also shills for the PGA Tour, they're also going to somehow creep back off their stance of what LIV is about, and they're going to start promoting the sport of golf and unity all of a sudden. The top players in the world, if they're pissed off, it's time for them to sound off, instead of in a closed-door meeting with the players and Monahan somehow jumping in an argument with Monahan to go after the 227th player in the world.
Well, and coming
got to
up,
be better than that.
Coming up at 5:15 Eastern, we'll give an opportunity for one of those players to sound off with
Yeah,
Scott
and he will.
Stallings, as you mentioned, and he's going to be very honest in this interview, I feel like. So that's going to be something worth listening to. Look, Rory McIlroy still has one chance to be the martyr in this story: retire from golf. If you really believe everything you stood for a year ago and that you stand for now, then never play another round of professional golf. You've made enough money, and he'll be a hero to many people if he does that. He's not. I don't expect him to do that. But that would be the only way that he doesn't look like a hypocrite like Jay Monahan. And I like Rory McIlroy. I have no problems with him personally. I feel like he's a really good guy. And I don't think that there was some evil intent with everything he was saying a year ago. But if you don't want to look like a hypocrite, that now that your boss has done that, first off, don't tell someone in the room to pipe down when they're asking questions, and don't look like a stooge for Jay Monahan in some sort of setting. But don't take the money. Go ahead and resign, retire from the PGA Tour now that LIV Tour is a part of it, if you really believe everything you said a year ago. Not going to happen, though.
Yeah, the biggest pawns were the biggest names that stuck with PGA, not guys like Grayson Murray, who were being vocal and asking for a resignation of Jay Monahan. Meanwhile, consider this. Bryson DeChambeau is going on CNN, and it was asked directly about 9/11 and everything that Saudi stands for or doesn't stand for in regards to human rights, how the families of 9/11 have issued a statement just like they did a year ago, calling the players that left Saudi shills. They're doing that again here. And Bryson DeChambeau is answering a question a year later the same way he's answered it in previous times. I think we'll never be able to repay the families back for what exactly happened just over 20 years ago. And what happened is definitely horrible. I think as time has gone on, 20 years has passed, and we're in a place now where it's time to start trying to work together to make things better as a whole. That's what DeChambeau told Caitlin Collins on CNN yesterday. But keep in mind here, and I'm tying Rory McIlroy back in, Rory McIlroy will now have to answer these same questions, despite him not knowing, allegedly not knowing, about what was going on for the last 7 weeks. That is what Jay Monahan has created here. So, the players that took the money, and guess what? All of a sudden, they're back with the PGA a year later. And the optics of that mean what? I mean, I'm still going to watch the sport. LIV Tour players were already participating in the majors. That helped out with ratings. Just ask the Masters. Ask the PGA Championship. Coming up, we've got the U.S. Open. People will watch and tune in based on the drama of all of this. But also, I don't think the actual sport changes all that much in how we view it. And I don't think the camaraderie between the players does either. Because it really wasn't a topic in locker rooms, in clubhouses, whenever these guys would actually mingle for the first couple of times. It just wasn't. And now Jay Monahan has joined them anyway. So what difference does it make in that regard?
David in the YouTube chat says, Monahan is telling high-profile players he will make them whole. Reports are Tiger Woods got offered over $700 million, or around that number.
No.
He's not going to be made whole. He's not going to make $700 million from the PGA Tour now. Now, are they going to get kickbacks? Are they going to find ways to give them some more money? Guys like Rory McIlroy? Possibly.
Hang on, though. Make them whole with the same dollars that they were against a year ago. So if they take the money, they're also as hypocritical as Jay Monahan. So I don't know how they're made whole with the same money that they refused to take last year.
No, there's no way they're not hypocrites. I'm saying for those that said, you told us, don't worry about the money, don't take it, you're going to be, branded this awful person for the rest of your life if you take the money. Mm-hmm. We could have had that money, and now we're all in the same group. So are you going to do something to make up for that since that was your guidance to us? I mean, they're not what I'm saying. Those figures from the Saudi wealth group is so enormous, they cannot be made completely whole based on the offers they were getting and now coming back. They just lost that money. Are they going to find ways to pay them more? Probably, the high-profile guys. Yeah. They've been doing that already, but there's no way to be made completely financially whole by what they turned down to go to LIV in the moment. But, and these TV partners also, I know we're going to talk about Brandel Chamblee at some point. I'm very interested to see how quickly they either stick to their guns or fall in line, and what that says about Saudi influence on the tour now. Because if this is truly blood money and they're out for blood, then there's gonna be some heads will roll. Professionally, not actually. Hopefully not. And tying this in, the question from CNN to Bryson DeChambeau, there's no good answer he can give. Right. I don't think he gave that bad of an answer. And the only answer you can give in that setting is, I'm a golfer, I don't want to talk about that. I'm not going to get into that. I think he said politics, and Caitlin Collins said, well, it's not politics, we're talking about human rights here. So I'm not going to talk about human rights. I'm not going to talk about this. We'll talk about the golf angle of this and what they're trying to accomplish with golf. That's all you can say without saying something that's going to sound offensive when you're talking about 9/11.
Well, you mentioned
and victims' families.
Rory's been outspoken. DeChambeau's answering that question. You mentioned Brandel Chamblee, Golf Channel. He's been as outspoken as anyone on the media front. Here's Chamblee addressing the merger yesterday on the Golf Channel.
I think this is one of the saddest days in the history of professional golf. I do believe that the governing bodies, the entities, the professional entities have sacrificed their principles for profit.
So I think that the angle from the media coverage of this will be, they're going to act as though they're neutral. They've been extremely biased for the last year. Now they'll try to play it off as if they're neutral instead of one side or the other. I don't think Nance is going to be cracking jokes that, no one saw Koepka win in Orlando prior to the Masters, right? Because the CW line that he's throwing out. Beyond that, I think they approach these tournaments the same way for their coverage. Chamblee can continue to be as outspoken as he wants to in this. But as far as the actual coverage goes, I think everyone just toes the line because that's what they did for the PGA and Monahan a year ago.
Well, and what does the new PGA Tour want in all of this? Because Brandel Chamblee does work for Golf Channel, which is owned by NBC, which is obviously a huge partner of the PGA Tour. So are they going to flex muscle and say this guy's got to go? Or are they going to let him continue? Because to his credit, he's not back down. He's saying everything he said before. That was very consistent. He didn't change his tune when this merger happened. He doubled down on everything he said. Will that be allowed as we continue, or is he about to be out of a job? That's another question I have from the media side of this. We'll find out soon enough.
Scott Van Pelt, very vocal about this as well. You know, there are others that can be the leading voice of this that have covered the sport for decades. Very intriguing to see how the top names do that from the media world and from the PGA Tour.